11 words from a woman who had lost 5 years of her life to amnesia brought Ellen DeGeneres' talk show to an emergency halt and changed the course of a criminal investigation that had baffled police for half a decade. But it wasn't the words themselves that stopped Ellen mid-sentence. It was the crushing realization that they were watching someone remember the most traumatic moment of their life in real time, and that those memories held the key to a truth so devastating it would shatter everything everyone thought they knew about that tragic night. The moment those words escaped her lips, Ellen's show became something unprecedented, a courtroom where justice finally found its voice, and a witness stand where the only person who knew the truth finally remembered what had been stolen from her mind. The cameras kept rolling, but for 137 seconds, television stopped being entertainment and became evidence in one of the most shocking crime revelations ever captured on live television. Because sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones buried in our own minds, and sometimes remembering can be more terrifying than forgetting. Let me take you back to how we reached that moment of earth-shattering revelation. It was a cold Tuesday morning in January at Stage 1 on the Warner Bros. Ellen DeGeneres was preparing to tape what should have been an inspiring segment about survivors who had overcome traumatic brain injuries, a celebration of the resilience of the human spirit and the remarkable capacity of the mind to heal. The kind of uplifting content that reminded viewers that recovery was always possible, no matter how dire the circumstances. Diana Patterson sat in the green room, her hands folded carefully in her lap, wearing a simple black dress that hung loosely on her thin frame. At 34, Diana carried herself with the hesitant movements of someone who was still learning to trust her own perceptions. Her shoulder-length brown hair framed a face that bore the subtle scars of extensive reconstructive surgery. And though her physical healing was remarkable, there was something in her green eyes that suggested deeper wounds that might never fully mend. Diana had been invited to the show after a local news story about her recovery had captured national attention. 5 years earlier, Diana Patterson had been the sole survivor of a brutal home invasion that had claimed the lives of her husband, Marcus, and their twin 8-year-old daughters, Sophie and Emma. The attack had left Diana with severe traumatic brain injury and complete retrograde amnesia. She had lost all memory of the attack itself and the entire year leading up to it. For 5 years, she had been rebuilding her life from fragments, relying on police reports, medical records, and the accounts of others to understand what had happened to her family. The case had remained unsolved. No suspects had ever been identified. The crime scene had yielded minimal evidence, and Diana's amnesia meant that the only witness to the murders couldn't remember anything that might help solve them. The investigation had eventually gone cold, leaving Diana to heal not just from her physical injuries, but from the crushing weight of survivor's guilt and the torment of not being able to help bring her family's killer to justice. But 3 months ago, something remarkable had begun to happen. After years of experimental treatments, therapy sessions, and gradual recovery, Diana's memories had started to return. Not all at once, but in fragments, fleeting images, sounds, emotions that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her consciousness. Her doctors had warned her that recovered memories could be unreliable, that trauma could distort recollections, but Diana had been working with both medical professionals and law enforcement to carefully document anything that surfaced. During the pre-interview, Diana had been articulate about her recovery journey, discussing the challenges of rebuilding an identity when you've lost the memories that define you. She talked about learning to live with gaps in her past, about the strange experience of mourning a family she could remember loving but couldn't remember losing. Her story was meant to inspire other brain injury survivors and highlight the incredible advances in neurological rehabilitation. But Ellen's producers had no idea that Diana Patterson was about to remember something that would reopen one of the most tragic unsolved cases in recent memory. Now, sitting across from Ellen on the familiar set, the interview began with Ellen's characteristic combination of warmth and respect for Diana's journey. The audience responded with supportive applause as Ellen introduced Diana, highlighting her remarkable recovery and the strength she had shown in rebuilding her life. "Diana, your story is absolutely extraordinary," Ellen began, settling into her chair with genuine admiration for Diana's resilience. To survive what you survived, and then to face the challenge of rebuilding your entire sense of self, that takes incredible courage. Can you tell us about what the recovery process has been like? Diana's voice was soft but steady as she described the long journey back from the brink. She talked about relearning basic skills, about the frustration of having gaps in her memory, about the support of medical professionals and the few friends who had remained in her life after the tragedy. "The hardest part," Diana said quietly, "isn't remembering what happened that night. The hardest part is not remembering the life I had before. I know I loved my family deeply, but I can't access most of the memories of our life together. It's like knowing you once had something precious, but being unable to remember what made it so valuable. Ellen's expression grew more compassionate as Diana continued. But recently, things have been changing. My neurologist says that sometimes, with time and the right therapeutic approaches, memories that were locked away by trauma can begin to surface. And that's been happening to me over the past few months. Ellen leaned forward with interest. That must be both exciting and overwhelming. What kind of memories have been coming back? Diana paused for a moment, her expression growing more complex. It's been complicated. Some memories are beautiful. I remembered Sophie's laugh last month and the way Emma used to hum while she drew pictures. But other memories, they're harder, scarier. The studio grew quieter as the audience sensed the conversation was moving into more serious territory. Diana, Ellen said gently, I know this is difficult to talk about, but have any of the returning memories been connected to that night, to what happened to your family? Diana's composure began to shift slightly, and Ellen could see a flicker of something, fear, confusion, recognition cross her face. Ellen, Diana said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, that's actually why I wanted to come on your show today. Something happened 2 weeks ago during a therapy session, something that I think it might change everything. Ellen felt her breath catch as she sensed they were approaching something significant. The audience was completely silent now, understanding they were about to witness something profound. What happened, Diana? Diana took a shuddering breath, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of 5 years of buried truth, finally fighting its way to the surface. I remembered a voice, Ellen, a voice from that night, someone talking to the intruder before the attack began, someone who shouldn't have been there, someone who... Diana's voice broke, and Ellen could see tears forming in her eyes as the memory seemed to be surfacing in real time, someone who called the killer by name. The studio fell into complete silence. Ellen's eyes widened as she realized they weren't just discussing recovered memories, they were potentially witnessing new evidence in an unsolved murder case. Diana, Ellen said carefully, are you saying you remember someone else being there that night? Someone who knew the person who attacked your family? Diana nodded, tears now streaming down her face. Ellen, the voice I remembered, it belonged to someone I trusted, someone who had keys to our house, someone who my family would have let in without question. Ellen's producer was frantically signaling from the booth, understanding that they had moved far beyond typical talk show territory into potential criminal evidence, but Ellen made the decision to continue. Diana, if you're comfortable sharing this, can you tell us who you remember being there? What happened next would make television history and reopen a murder investigation that had been closed for 3 years. Diana looked directly into the camera, her voice clear and strong despite her tears. It was my brother-in-law, David, Marcus's younger brother. He was there that night, Ellen. He let the killer into our house, and when I heard him say, make sure the wife doesn't survive to identify us, I realized David wasn't just there. He was part of it. Ellen DeGeneres, in 30 years of television, had never experienced anything like what happened next. For 137 seconds, she sat in complete silence, her mouth open in shock, her hands gripping the arms of her chair as she processed what she had just heard. The audience gasped audibly, several people bringing their hands to their mouths in horror. When Ellen finally found her voice, it came out as barely a whisper. Diana, are you telling us that you remember your brother-in-law orchestrating the attack that killed your family? Diana nodded, her composure somehow strengthening as she spoke the truth she had carried unknowingly for 5 years. David had gambling debts, Ellen, massive ones. Marcus had refused to help him anymore, had cut him off financially. But Marcus had a large life insurance policy, and if something happened to both Marcus and me, David was the beneficiary for the children's trust fund. He needed Marcus dead, and he needed me dead too, so there would be no witnesses and no one to challenge his access to the money. Ellen stood up slowly and walked around to sit next to Diana, taking her hands in a gesture of support rather than judgment. Diana, this is extraordinary and incredibly brave of you to share. Have you spoken to the police about these recovered memories? I met with Detective Morrison yesterday, Diana said. She's the one who originally investigated the case. She told me that they had always suspected someone with inside knowledge was involved, but they could never prove it. David had an alibi. He was supposedly at a casino that night, but Detective Morrison said they're going to reopen the investigation based on what I've remembered. What Ellen did next was unprecedented in her career. She made the decision to halt the show's normal taping and turn the remainder of the time into a platform for justice. Ladies and gentlemen, Ellen announced to the studio and the cameras, what we've just witnessed goes far beyond entertainment. Diana's courage in sharing these memories could finally bring justice for her family. But more than that, it shows us the incredible power of the human mind to protect us from trauma until we're strong enough to face the truth. She turned back to Diana. How does it feel to finally remember? To finally know what really happened that night? Diana's response was both heartbreaking and inspiring. It's terrifying, Ellen. For 5 years I've lived with the mystery of not knowing who took my family from me. But I've also lived with the guilt of being the only survivor, of not being able to help catch whoever did this. Now I know the truth, and it's worse than I ever imagined. Someone we trusted, someone who sat at our dinner table, someone who hugged my daughters and called them his nieces, planned their murders. But it's also liberating, because finally I can help Marcus and Sophie and Emma get the justice they deserve. Ellen announced that her show would be following the case and providing support for Diana throughout the legal process. But what happened next was even more remarkable. Within hours of the episode being filmed, David Patterson, who had been watching the taping from his home in Arizona, called his lawyer and confessed. The weight of seeing Diana remember, combined with the knowledge that his crime was now public, broke him completely. He admitted to arranging the home invasion, to hiring the killer, to planning the murders of his own brother and nieces for insurance money. The episode aired 2 weeks later and became one of the most watched and most important in Ellen's show history. But more significantly, it led to the conviction of David Patterson for 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The hired killer, identified through David's confession, was arrested in Mexico and extradited to face charges. Diana's recovered memories were corroborated by new evidence that investigators uncovered once they knew where to look. David's financial records showed the payments to the killer. Security footage from the casino revealed that his alibi had been fabricated. Cell phone records placed him in the area at the time of the murders. But perhaps most importantly, Diana's courage in sharing her story inspired other trauma survivors to trust their own recovered memories and to understand that healing sometimes means facing truths we're not ready to accept. 6 months after the show aired, Diana testified at David's trial. She faced the man who had orchestrated her family's murder and told the court exactly what she remembered from that night. David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ellen featured Diana's progress in several follow-up segments, but the most powerful one came a year later, when Diana had established a foundation to support families of violent crime victims and to fund research into trauma-related memory recovery. The thing people don't understand, Diana told Ellen during that follow-up interview, is that forgetting can be a gift when remembering would destroy you. My brain protected me from this knowledge until I was strong enough to handle it, strong enough to use it for justice. I lost 5 years of memories, but I gained the strength to face the truth and to make sure my family didn't die in vain. 3 years after that first appearance, Diana published a book about her experience titled When Memory Returns, A Journey from Amnesia to Justice. It became a bestseller and was used in psychology and criminology programs to teach about the complex relationship between trauma and memory. The Diana Patterson case also led to new protocols for handling recovered memories in criminal investigations, with law enforcement agencies receiving training on how to properly document and investigate claims that emerge from trauma therapy. Ellen often reflected on Diana's appearance as one of the most profound moments of her television career. Diana taught us that the mind has its own wisdom about what we can handle and when we can handle it, Ellen said during her final season. But she also taught us that truth has a way of surfacing, even when it's been buried by the deepest trauma. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is provide a safe space for that truth to finally be spoken. Diana Patterson lost her family to a brutal betrayal, lost 5 years of her life to amnesia, and lost her sense of safety in the world. But in recovering her memories, she found something invaluable: the power to transform her survival into justice, her pain into purpose, and her trauma into a tool for helping others. Her 11 words, "It was my brother-in-law, David. He was part of it," became more than just recovered memories. They became the key that unlocked justice for her murdered family and proved that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones who sit at our dinner tables, and sometimes the most powerful weapon against them is the truth that our minds protect until we're ready to wield it. Ellen DeGeneres built her career on celebrating human resilience, but that Tuesday morning when Diana shared her 11 words of devastating revelation, Ellen discovered something even more powerful: the incredible capacity of the human mind to protect us from unbearable truths until we're strong enough to use those truths to change the world. Because sometimes forgetting is the first step toward healing, and sometimes remembering is the first step toward justice. And sometimes the most extraordinary thing we can do is trust our minds to know the difference. The scientific implications of Diana's case sent shockwaves through the medical community. Dr. Rebecca Santos, a neuropsychologist at Johns Hopkins, published a groundbreaking study using Diana's brain scans to understand how traumatic memories are stored and retrieved. The research revealed that Diana's brain had essentially compartmentalized the traumatic memories to protect her psychological stability, releasing them only when her neural pathways had healed sufficiently to process them safely. The legal precedent set by Diana's case revolutionized how courts handle recovered memory testimony. The Patterson Protocol became standard practice in jurisdictions across the country, establishing guidelines for investigating crimes when new evidence emerges from trauma-related amnesia. Law schools began teaching Diana's case as a landmark example of how psychological healing can serve justice. Detective Morrison, who had worked the case for 5 years, later said that Diana's appearance on Ellen was the turning point, not just in this investigation, but in her entire approach to cold cases involving memory loss. Diana taught us that sometimes the most important evidence isn't missing, it's just waiting for the right moment to surface, Morrison explained in a criminology conference presentation. The killer hired by David Patterson was identified as Roberto Cruz, a career criminal with ties to illegal gambling operations. Cruz's confession provided additional details that corroborated Diana's memories, including specific phrases and actions that only someone present that night could have known. His testimony sealed David's conviction and led to the dismantling of a larger criminal network. 2 years after the trial, she had regained approximately 70% of her memories from before the attack. She chose to remember selectively, focusing on positive recollections of her family while working with therapists to process the traumatic elements safely. Her story became a case study in selective memory recovery and therapeutic healing. Ellen kept a photo from that shocking taping on her desk. It showed Diana in the moment, just before her revelation, her hand pressed to her temple as the memory surfaced. Ellen often looked at it when facing difficult interviews, reminded of the power of creating safe spaces for people to share impossible truths. The ripple effects of Diana's courage continued for years. The International Association of Memory Researchers established the Diana Patterson Fellowship, funding studies into trauma-related amnesia and recovery. Universities worldwide began incorporating her case into their neuroscience programs, teaching students about the brain's protective mechanisms during extreme trauma. Diana's foundation, Memories for Justice, grew into a nationwide organization helping crime victims who suffered memory loss. The foundation developed a revolutionary therapeutic protocol combining medical treatment with legal support, ensuring that recovered memories could be properly documented and investigated. Over 200 families found justice through similar memory recovery processes inspired by Diana's breakthrough. 5 years after the trial, Diana remarried, a therapist named Michael who had worked with trauma survivors and understood her unique journey. Together, they advocated for changes in how the justice system handles cases involving memory loss, testifying before Congress about the need for specialized training for law enforcement and prosecutors dealing with amnesia-related evidence. The most remarkable development came 6 years later, when Diana's case inspired breakthrough research in artificial memory stimulation. Scientists developed new technologies that could safely trigger memory recovery in trauma patients, leading to dozens of cold cases being solved worldwide. Diana became an advisor to this research, ensuring that ethical protocols protected patients while enabling justice. Diana often returned to Ellen's show for updates, but her final appearance was the most moving. 7 years after that first shocking revelation, she came back to announce the establishment of a memorial garden for her family, funded entirely by donations from viewers who had been moved by her story. The garden included an interactive memory wall where visitors could leave tributes to lost loved ones, creating a space where grief and healing could coexist. "Ellen," Diana said during that final visit, "when I lost my memories, I thought I had lost my family forever. But sharing my story here, finding my voice again, it brought them back to me in a different way. Now they live not just in my recovered memories, but in the lives we've saved, the cases we've solved, the families who found justice because of what happened in this studio."